Dear students, in this tutorial we're going to be seeing how to be working with airbrush. We have a few different variants in airbrush, and since it's a kind of illustration that really kind of screams for a sharp edge if you're working with single elements, I'm going to, instead of working only with selection, I'm going to be working as well with the safe transparency mode. So to start with, I'm going to do with the lasso tool the selection of my apple. And you can see here we have been working with the same image in a few different tutorials. So we should have already the apple drawing on the first layer so that everything that comes afterwards goes underneath it. And we could actually as well just block that layer so that nothing else goes into that layer. This happens quite often, that we work with a lot of layers and all of a sudden we kind of get lost, or we start painting on the wrong layer. So every single layer you would like to be saving so that nothing goes in there. Like, I would love to save this as well, because very often I work on the workspace or on the first layer in Painter, and for me this first layer just is in use if I'm doing an extra paper or doing patterns and so on. So this is practically the only moment I'm really using the first layer. Apart from that, I'm always opening a new layer and working with the transparency or with a transparent layer, because this one can block a lot of other functions that we could be using. So I just did a selection, and I'm going to increase the selection a little bit by pressing Shift. You can see that I get a plus, and I'm just increasing my selection a tiny little bit. And like this, I'm going to grab a quite simple type of airbrush tool, like the digital airbrush, and I'm filling up this layer with a warm yellow. Like this, I have the entire image that I would like to be working with already selected and painted. I'm going to deselect it by pressing Command D, and I'm going to save transparency mode, and I'm clicking on it. You can see this is this little button with a lock in there, and everything that is transparent in this layer we can see on the preview from the layer is with this kind of chess pattern in there in gray and white, and the color information is the only one that is going to be touched in this layer. And like this, I have much more freedom to be working. So I'm going to select, let me check. I told myself I would be working with something that I don't usually work. So airbrush is a tool that is not really what I have been using, but it's quite interesting. So I'm just going to be trying to illustrate something realistic in here and using everything I can in this airbrush category. Okay, so I just sprinkled a little bit around. This is quite interesting because it's a very smooth pepper spraying brush. You don't really need to be focusing too much on the amount of pressure you can do. It sprinkles very nicely. And after that, I'm going to select a darker color. And it's almost like working with a texture. Going to a darker yellow. I'm decreasing the size of my brush to bring some lightness on the edges of it. And I'm going to select the grobkörnig spray, and I would like to have this brush working with one single color. I don't want it to have any variation on the color. So if you go to color changing information below on your brush mechanics on media, we can see that we have 4% saturation. I would go here on 0 on the saturation and on value. so that the color that sprays out of my brush is going to be 100% the color that I selected. And like this I can, by making an inclination on the brush, like this brush is really not flat or on 90 degrees on my screen, so that the spraying is going up. You can see here it was a little bit too much. So that the area that I would like to have quite flat is still going to be with a strong line underneath here, and it's just spraying to the top. And this is actually the angle that I'm giving on my brush. Okay, so this is the inside of my apple. And I would like to combine now a little bit of my selection tool. And we have here a very interesting category which is called selection tools. And one variant that I think it's quite nice is this fractal up here. So I'm just going to be selecting a little bit around here, and let us check what this does. And afterwards I'm selecting again the sprinkling, the pepper. I could as well be working with a totally different airbrush, something that is smoother. But first I would like to see what this does. At the moment I'm working and continuing to use the same technique as I was using before. So this selected, and we can see it's quite nice. If you're working with the airbrush, it gives you a very interesting type of result. I'm going back there again to the selection tools, and I'm going to select the last one. And because I have the safe transparency mode, I can really go a little bit wild here. And it's just really going to be painting on the areas I'm selecting. So I'm going to go back now to the airbrush, and now I'm going to digital airbrush. I'm picking up a darker red, and I'm trying this once. Okay, you can see now that this is quite sprinkly, and I could reduce this a little bit, but it's interesting that it gives a little bit of texture into our apple. And I would like to go a little bit darker on the edges. And I'll just turn the drawing off. It's bothering a little bit. Selecting the red and going a little bit darker. And now like this I can increase the size of my brush as well. And I could now select the white. Do a little bit of lightness here. And I have the impression that I have just too much texture going on here, so I'm just reducing a little bit of the textures. I'm bringing up some more volume into here and here as well, closer to my little branch. I can bring up some lightness here on the edges, and maybe some little bit of rose here on that corner. Oh, that was too much. I can reduce the opacity so that we have a little bit more transparency in the airbrush stroke. Okay, so now I'm going to reduce the size of my airbrush. We have as well a detail airbrush, and I could now select the green color that I had in there, make it a little bit darker, and by reducing the size of the airbrush I can do more details. And I'll start doing the shadow. I'll just open a new layer, and I like to be showing the little bit of the color. Oh well, see if transparency is on, we have to turn it off. A little bit of the apple color in the shadow. And this is a good tool for you to as well make a mixture. Well, here is it just too light. I would like to have it darker. To kind of use an eraser for the airbrush is not so bad, since we could erase without having the texture, since we have too little texture going on. And I would recommend, if you're using an airbrush that gives you this kind of very blurry edge, to be using this very blurry type of eraser as well. We can start with a lower opacity and increase as much as you can the eraser. This was too much. And you can see now we have a very kind of horrible type of mark coming through this eraser. I would just go then to the shape. I would just go to the shape of my eraser, and we can see here we have a 20% distance between the single dabs. I would reduce it a lot. Now we can try it out. Yeah, it looks much better. So like this we have much more interesting type of erasing. It's much smoother, and we don't really see this horrible dab coming through, dab mark coming through. And it's still not exactly the way I would like to have it. Of course not, somehow it came back to the other variant. Okay, now it's looking better. Okay, so this would be kind of the airbrush tutorial. We could as well be working a little bit more on these edges. I could actually go as well with the eraser here and not have such a very strong edge coming through. Why is it always on 100%? Okay, so I'm just smoothing it up a little bit so that it looks more like having the shadow closer to the apple as well. Okay, so it's much more smoother. The edges are fine. We have a little bit of this color reflecting from the apple to the ground. I'll just go a little bit more in there. That was not good. It was on the wrong layer. Yep. And this is what you can as well be doing with the airbrush from Painter, working with some texture, working without texture, and a very smooth type of line. And I hope you can try this out. It's a very nice way to be working, and allows you, if you would like to be working longer on an illustration, to make it very, very realistic as well. Okay, talk to you soon on the next tutorial. Bye bye!